B'siyata d'shmaya, we've spent the last couple of shiurim of this series learning Sichos HaRan on Sicha Ayin Dalid. And the whole Sicha Ayin Dalid has really been about tefillah. And we've learned many different perspectives about tefillah, step by step, different angles, with different teachings that we've added and aided us in our understanding of Rebbe Nachman's teaching of Ayin Dalid 74, or 75 rather. Now we move Be'ezus Hashem into Ayin Vav, which is Sicha 76, the 76th lesson in Sichos HaRan, and unsurprisingly wedded to Ayin Hey, which is a Sicha all about Tefillah. Sicha Ayin Vav is a Sicha about learning Torah, halimmud HaTorah. And similar to Sicha Ayin Hey, it's pretty long, it's pretty lengthy. I'm going to share my screen now. We'll take a look at it. And when it came to this Sicha, just in preparation, I decided that it would be best to just go through the whole entire Sicha from beginning to end. It's a little bit lengthy, but we'll try to cover the whole thing in today's shiur. And then in the next shiur or two, we'll go back and we'll look at other sources, because the whole Sicha really needs to be learned in one sitting so that we can balance different chalakim, different parts of this Sicha with the other parts and get a broader picture of the whole teaching as Rebbe Nachman lays it out here in this incredible and well-known Sicha Ayin Vav, in order to aid our understanding of the different pieces and also to be able in future shiurim to make reference to the different parts of the Sicha. I've added English headings just to split the Sicha up into these 5 different elements, these 5 different chapters, if you will, within Sicha Ayin Vav. So first we're going to learn about the Rebbe's own learning. Then we will see about the Rebbe's focus on learning quickly and even saying the words, we'll see. And then the amount that Rebbe Nachman wanted his Hasidim and those that were following his derech to finish in a given year. And then his teaching that review should not be done after 1 page or 2 pages, but it should be done after the whole entire inyan that one completes, whether it's a sefer, whether it's a chelek of learning, then go back to the beginning. We're going to learn about that. And then finally, because even just reading these headings, we can understand that there's a certain sense of pressure that comes when you're learning about idealistic goals in Torah study. We learn about the importance of going step by step, not feeling pressured in any way, doing what we can, and at the same time, contextualizing our efforts in the proper, healthy way, which is the focus of Rebbe Nachman's teachings. We've learned in many previous shiurim that the whole thing of Rebbe Nachman, when understood properly, is all about balance. It's all about balance. It's all about contextualization. Rebbe Nachman said about his sefer Sichos HaRan, which is the teachings in the classroom, so to speak, and Sichos HaRan, as the title of our series is called Class Trip with Rebbe Nachman. It's like learning from the Rebbe when you take a trip with the class and you're talking with the Rebbe on the bus and you're schmoozing with him and learning different stories and anecdotes, and it's more biographical and it's not so much like sitting in the classroom, so to speak, getting lectured to. But Sichos HaRan, which is a collection of Rebbe Nachman's Torah teachings, the Rebbe says that a person that learns that sefer properly, he says a person can gain a moyach gadol, which means, just in translation, a big brain, a big mind. What does it mean, a big mind? We have to understand what it means, big. What does it mean, gadol? Gadol means expansive. And expansivity connotes breadth. That's what it means, a moyach gadol. Means we develop a consciousness that's able to balance between a great many different perspectives and utilize all of those perspectives to balance each other out so that we can come to a far more nuanced approach where we understand what we need to be doing to push ourselves. That's called the hasaga, as we've learned, of aye mekayim kavaydai, always asking, where is Hashem, striving to greater and greater heights, and at the same time, we can comfort ourselves, and we can also never move too far away from the perspective that, in fact, Meloi Chol Haaretz Kavoidai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right here. He's with me already, and that doesn't either take away from my from the need to strive to greater heights, but at the same time, I don't lose, my motivation when I feel like I'm not gaining anything. Hashem is already with me, and it's that balance as it manifests across the whole spectrum of Yiddishkeit that Rebbe Nachman wants to impart, and that's our derech halimmud, as we're learning Sichos HaRan and Rebbe Nachman's teachings, always keeping that balance. And that was the Rebbe's whole focus, and we're going to learn that in the context of limud Torah as we journey through Sicha Ayin Vav Be'ezus Hashem. One more note. The sugya of derech halimmud, of the correct approach to Torah study, is a sensitive one. It's a sensitive one because most of us have been educated in yeshivas, and in the yeshivas, a very particular methodology of learning is given over, and we don't really question it. I mean, this is the way that we learn. This is the way that Jews learn. Even more specifically, we come out with a pretty clear picture of not just the way that we should learn, but what we should learn. Because the yeshivas focus on a particular cycle of mesechtas and a particular kind of approach to an area of limud Torah, and that's something that most of us don't even question. And when we think about learning, we always think about learning within that construct, within that derech halimmud, and within that range of Torah that we come to think, well, that's what learning Torah means. And so we have to understand, as we're about to understand, that Sicha Ayin Vav is a radical departure from what most of us have been brought up with in terms of how we would think about what learning means. And we have to be ready to handle that. We have to understand. Doesn't mean all of a sudden we should let go of everything that we've learned until now about how to learn and what to learn and just jump to the opposite extreme and go against Chas v'Shalom, the Seder in the yeshivas if we happen to be still at that stage in life. That's not what the intention is, and that's not the healthy thing, and that's not necessarily the right thing, as we're going to learn from the Shmuos, from research that I've personally done in terms of how this Sicha is implemented in more modern day Breslov circles and so on, because we don't necessarily find that everyone does this, and certainly not from younger ages, etc. We're going to get into all that with Hashem's help. But to be aware that the yeshivas embody one approach, and there are other approaches. We're going to spend time next week, Be'ezus Hashem, learning from the Maral and the Archas Tzadikim and the Shla Kadosh and other Tzadikim who also spoke in this way. But Rebbe Nachman really contextualizes this approach probably more clearly than anyone else, in a super, super clear, non-vague, very explicit expression, where the Rebbe just lays out in the Sicha an entirely different approach to limud Torah, both in terms of its methodology and in terms of what we can access and what Torah means. And it can be a lifesaver for many, many, many individuals who, unlike the many, 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 perhaps more individuals that the current system, so to speak, and I mean the approach to limud Torah does work for, there are many, many, many individuals that it doesn't necessarily work for. And if all that they come to understand about learning is within the confines of one particular approach, and they don't know that there are other approaches, so then the result can chas v'shalom be that they let go of learning altogether. And so this Sicha can be really life-giving. And it could be, as some of you have mentioned to me, that by nature you have already felt a netiya, a kind of draw toward the kind of learning that Rebbe Nachman is going to talk about, more Bekias oriented, and we always feel a little bit queasy about that, those of us that have that netiya, because in yeshivas the main focus, as we're going to learn, is on iyun. And so to be able to see that there was a gadol who we might identify hashkafically with, even though we might not be in a Breslover yeshiva, or we might not have grown up in a Breslover community, or we might not daven in a Breslover shul, but we feel that Rebbe Nachman's hashkafa speaks to our neshama very deeply. To hear that the tzaddik had his own approach to learning, and that's what aligns with what we feel innately, naturally drawn to, it could be a tremendous chizuk within our own learning and can supercharge our learning in our own derech. And we're going to get into all this Be'ezus Hashem. But this is going to be, it's going to be different. It might come as a shock. It might be something we need to learn again and again to review. And without further ado, let's get into Sicha Ayin Vav. B'siyata d'shmaya, with the help of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the intention of being Mekadosh Shem Shemayim and revealing His kavod in the world. Says the Rebbe Sichos HaRan, or rather we begin with Rebbe Nachman speaking about Rebbe Nachman's own personal learning, about which In many of the Sfarim from Breslov, there's references made to Rebbe Nachman's own accomplishments in limud Torah, and this is one of them, perhaps prime and chief among them. Says Rebbe Nachman, Shamati b'shmoi mikvar. I had heard in Rebbe Nachman's name, Shesipar, that he told over about himself, Shelamad kol arba shulchan aruch shalish pa'amim. That the Rebbe had learned the entire Shulchan Aruch, 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch, covering the entire spectrum of halacha. He had learned this 3 times. Pam achas kipshutai. The first time that Rebbe Nachman learned Shulchan Aruch, which is a massive accomplishment, was just, so to speak, al pi pshat, just to learn it, what the words say, and what the halachas are, and what the decisions, halachic decisions are from the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber, and the Ramah. Upam Sheni, the second time he learned it, Lama b'Gemara Isam, v'yedea b'chol din v'din me'ar b'Shulchan Aruch, ha'shayrish shalei b'Gemara perish Rashi Tosfos. The second time he learned it with the intention of being able to trace every halachic decision back to its source, where it comes from in the Gemara, in the Mishnayos and the Gemara, obviously drawing back to Psukim in the Torah, in Tanakh, and then filtered through the opinions of Rashi, Tosfos, and the Rishonim. Upam Shlishi, and the third time that Rebbe Nachman learned the entire Shulchan Aruch, Lamad v'Gamar Isam, he finished them again, v'Zachaleda b'chol din v'din soid ha'kavana shel hadin, and this time he learned it Kabbalistically, to be able to understand what the mystical underpinnings of these laws were, and what is being accomplished, and how the mystical elements of the Torah culminate in this particular guidance with regard to how to act when it comes to this halacha, and the other halacha. Mibnei ma'adin kach al pisoid. Why al pisoid? In accordance with the Kabbalistic understanding of the Torah, is this the halacha. And Reb Nassan adds, and from the sound of it, says Reb Nassan, what we know about Rebbe Nachman, this was all when he was a child. This is not like the sum total of Rebbe Nachman's accomplishments in learning, because he says, this was just the first 3 times that he had learned Shulchan Aruch, and then he just reviewed them again and again and again and again throughout his very short life. But al kapanim, these 3 cycles of learning Shulchan Aruch, one al pi pshat, the second you'd say bi'iyun, and then the third al pi soid was all when he was young, when he was a child. V'darkai, says Reb Nassan, Rebbe Nachman's way in learning, he was just learning all the time, a lot of learning. Even though he was ill for the majority of his short and tortured life. But even, says Reb Nassan, even when he was extremely ill at the very end, without going to graphic descriptions of what that looked like, but Reb Nassan does, in Sichos HaRan, and it was terrible suffering that he experienced. Even though he was constantly under so much different pressure from the responsibility of being a Rebbe and having Hasidim and running a community and a shul and a Beis Medrash, says Reb Nassan, he just took care of us and he was busy with us all the time. And busy spending time with individuals and talking with them and guiding them and directing them and helping them come close to Hashem. Whatever it was that a person needed help with, Rebbe Nachman was advising them and spending time with them. And his mind also was constantly just experiencing great measures of illumination in a spiritual sense, contemplating godliness and higher level revelations and experiences. So even though he was ill and he had so many communal responsibilities, and also there was a part of his consciousness that was always busy just focusing on the divine, even so, he spent many hours a day learning Torah, so to speak, b'pshitas, just to actually learn, right, outside of the more mystical meditations. Actual learning, Tanakh, as we're going to see, Gemara, Rishonim, Achronim, and so on. But v'lo yahayatarad klal. Even giving everything that he needed to do and everything that he was doing, he was never ever tarud. He was never like too busy. He was never in a state of tension. Tamid haya b'yishav hadas. Rebbe Nachman was always with yishav hadas, totally settled, not a care in the world. Even though he had so many things to take care of, everything was done with a spirit of yishav hadas, which I've said in previous shiurim, and I'll say again. I think that if we can find a phrase that best captures the Breslover atmosphere, it's this phrase, Yishuv Hadas, just total calm. Total calm. Doesn't mean bittul, as we're going to see. It doesn't mean not doing anything and not caring about anything. It means doing everything and yet not having a care in the world. Doing everything, but with Yishuv Hadas. Ubi inyan zeh, says Rebbe Nachman, when it came to this inyan of Yishuv Hadas, hayachidish nifla. Rebbe Nachman was an absolute wonder in terms of how he was able to maintain this spirit of calm, of total calm. Umachma zeh, and he says, he says you can't even start to describe it because it was just something you had to experience. How a person could be so busy and so conscious and so focused and accomplishing so much, but at the same time, there's just an atmosphere of total calm and total like a settled mind. Yishuv hadas. Umachma zeh, says Rebbe Nachman, because he was so calm, haylei panai al kol davar. He just had time for everything. He had time for everything. He had time for everyone. And somehow things just worked out. And it's a counterintuitive thing because you think that if a person had a much more maybe focused, like internal energy, that he just has so much to do and he's busy focusing on trying to do this and do that and the other thing and running from one thing to the next and trying to cram it all in, you think he'd get a lot more done. And Rebbe Nachman says counterintuitively that's not the case. Like they say in English, slow and steady wins the race. That was Rebbe Nachman's thing, was steady, without any bewilderment. And we've learned this in previous Sichos as well. I think Rebbe Nachman has a lashon earlier in Sichos HaRan that we learned, al tia nivhal, right? Not to become bewildered. Do a lot, but do it with joy. Do it with a hop in your step. You're not being pressured. It's a privilege. It's not pressure. You have to exchange one P for the other P. It's not pressure. It's privilege. One step at a time. There's a lot to do. What a privilege. That's it. And you go with a sense of Yishuv Hadas and calm, appreciating every little bit that you can do while striving to achieve more. Everything with a sense of calm. And therefore, he had time for everything. He was chilling. He was also doing a lot, but he was doing it in a very relaxed way. The spirit of calm. Rebbe Nachman, and here we begin to see a little bit of the emergence of what we're about to learn in terms of how he wanted to guide others. Rebbe Nachman was learning super quickly. B'mehiras gadol ma'od, very quickly. In 1 hour, he was learning many pages of Shulchan Aruch. In kol hapirushim kulam shesaviv, with all of the commentaries that are printed, right? In the larger print of Shulchan Aruch that's printed with the Taz and the Shach and the Magen Avram, like he says, the Torah and the Magen Avram, the Be'er HaGoyla, Pri Chadash, Ater Zekanim, all the different Pirushim that are printed in small lettering around the 4 or 5 lines of actual Shulchan Aruch written by Rabbi Yosef Karo and the Ramah, the glosses, which are followed by the Ashkenazi Jews, that are printed on the page of Shulchan Aruch, but around them is just an incredible amount of commentary, and Rebbe Nachman was just pounding through them, page after page after page, in a very speedy fashion. All the different names of the different commentaries as they change from volume to volume. The Siper, and Rebbe Nachman said, while everybody else is busy preparing themselves for davening in the morning, from the time that you first get to shul, and then you have to make your coffee, and then you have to sit around and shmooze a bit, and then by the time the chevra actually got around to start davening, Rebbe Nachman said, he had already learned 4 daf of Shulchan Aruch, while everybody else is getting themselves ready. So that was his energy. It was like super focused and no time to waste. And he didn't. And he was able, with this method, to cover a tremendous amount of ground, as we're going to see in the quote-unquote the second chapter. It's artificial. I just split it up, but I think it helps to help us focus on, each step along the way in Sicha Ayin Vav. V'chol ma shalamad, whatever he learned, Gemara, Poisik, V'chiyotze, whatever he was learning, Gemara or halachas, whatever, Hakol hay b'mihiras gadol ma'od. Very, very quickly he learned. Very quickly. Okay, and now we're going to learn about not just how Rebbe Nachman learned, but the way in which he wanted to guide others to do the same. One of the unique things about Rebbe Nachman, also something that we've said in previous shiurim, is that here was a person who embodied everything that he taught. He literally was just giving advice, not based on what he learned in some sefer that this is a good thing to do. It's because that's what he did. And the way that he learned how to do this, sometimes he got from earlier guidance, and sometimes it was just his own eitzes that he discovered along the way. And he wanted other people to be able to access and to attain what he accessed and attained, which was a life bursting with meaning and contextualized in a spirit of calm and balance and health. Isn't that what we want? And that's everything that every person in the world wants. Rebbe Nachman wanted to give that to us. So he said, listen, I can only tell you what I did. And that's what he did. He didn't have two standards. He wanted every single Jew to be able to access what he did. He said that explicitly. He said that if you'll follow my eitzos, my advice, he said you can become a tzaddik. He said, kamoini mamish. Mamish on my madrega. Whatever I reached is within the capacity of all of us to attain. On our madrega, but mamish to try to follow these pieces of advice. So here Rebbe Nachman takes his own personal derech halimmud, which in Breslov is a reference to this Sicha. It's called the derech halimmud in Breslov. And he wanted to give it over to us. And here goes. V'siper imanu harbe be'inyan zeh. Says Reb Nassan, he spoke to us a very, very great amount about this derech. Shetayv lilmaid b'mihirus. It is very good to learn quickly. We would call this, I think, in modern parlance, we'd call this bikiyas as opposed to bi'iyun. Bikiyas means to just be like have expertise and a very wide range of different limudim. And not to get caught up on the details. Learn what's in front of you and move on. Learn the next piece of Gemara and move on without getting sunken into the hair-splitting dialectical details of the theoretics and the pilpul of learning. Raglomad bipshitus bizrizus. These two things are the foundation for Rebbe Nachman's derech halimmud. Simplicity, simple, and quick. And these two things, of course, go hand in hand, because one of the obstacles to learning quickly is that we're not learning simply. We're not learning simply. Take the standard way that the yeshivas are teaching us how to learn Gemara. Right away, there's Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. Some Tosfosin, it would be interesting to know, to ask a real Talmud Chacham, like what percentage of the Tosfosin are like this and what percentages are like that. Some Tosfosin are literally pshat oriented. And they'll ask a kasha on Rashi, and they'll say that it can't be pshat. I just had this morning, we're learning in Kedushin, Daf Chesam and Beis, and there's two different ways of learning the Gemara. Rashi has one pshat, Tosfos has another pshat. That's fine. That's a Tosfos that's local, that's a Tosfos that's on the daf, and it's relating to what we're learning and just what the Shakla Vatari is. That's called pshat. But a very large amount of Tosfosin are not, so to speak, on the daf. They are looking at Gemaras all over Shas, analyzing the way in which we understand those Gemaras and saying, wow, well, if we understand that sugya there, so then it doesn't seem to fit with our sugya here. And then Tosfos will go onto a whole journey of how to make a chilik, to define, and the halacha gets more specific. But already, if we're doing that, then it's already not pshat. That's already beyond pshat. It might be super useful. I don't mean to say that chas v'shalom, it's pointless or it's theoretics. It's not theoretics. If I used that word before, I shouldn't have. It's not theoretics, right? Because there are halachic implications. If you look in the Beis Yosef, on so many halachas, it's learned out from chidushim and Tosfos, right? That don't seem to be pshat oriented. They certainly have a practical implication. That's okay if you're learning aliba de hilchasa. But then you begin with the Shulchan Aruch and the Beis Yosef instead of starting with the Gemara, learning a Masechta and then branching off into all areas of halacha because you learned the Tosfos that happens to talk about, some halacha in a totally different Masechta while you're learning Hilchas, A, and you're learning all of a sudden something that has no connection to it, right? There's a way of learning the practical application of that, but usually these two things don't go together. Usually if you're learning Gemara, so then you're learning it for the pshat of the actual Gemara that you're learning. But this is not usually the way that we're learning in yeshivas. In yeshivas, it's the opposite. It's not zrizos because it's not pshitos. And so we end up getting not extricated, that's the opposite. We end up getting sunk very deeply into one sugya, analyzing all aspects of it and building out a whole range of topics that are somewhat linked and connected in the Rishonim and in the Achronim. And then in the meantime, we might not even have clarity in what the Gemara actually says. Like here, we might be able to come out with some very fancy chiddush that can answer up, 10 steers in Rambam, that you happen to learn because one of the points that the Rambam focuses on is your Gemara. But all of a sudden, it's already become something else. It's already something, you're not really learning the Gemara. All of a sudden, you're learning Torah, but it's something else. That's not pshitos, and therefore it's not zrizos. And so in a whole winter's man, in many yeshivas, you cover 4, 5, 6 plot. It depends. Some go faster, some go slower. But that wasn't the Rebbe's derech. That wasn't the Rebbe's derech at all. And we're going to learn next week that the Rebbe wasn't the first one to talk about the importance of needing to go slow. We're going to see from the Maharal that the Maharal himself said, first learn the Gemara and Rashi, and then after we finish Shas, go back to Tosfos. That's what the Maharal said. A whole different way of learning. It's a whole different way of learning, and it's good to know, again, if it's not at our stage and age and we happen to be in yeshiva and we're not learning on our own time, okay, we're learning in a certain derech, and that's fine. But to know that something else exists, that there is another approach, and let every Jew, in the spirit of individuality, in the spirit of limanat Torah, understanding that every neshama is rooted in another letter of the Torah, let every Jew be exposed to the range of drachim and let him choose. We have to follow our heart when it comes to these things. What's the approach for me? What's the approach for you? Rak lilmud b'pshitos b'zrizos. Simply, quickly. Like we just described, not to allow ourselves in the course of learning one particular Gemara to start getting dragged into a whole bunch of different stuff that might be fascinating, might be important, might be even have practical implications for halacha. You can, if you're conscious of it and you're learning in this way, I'm talking about iyun. You can sort of feel out, okay, when are we getting lost? Like now we're like in a whole different area of halacha. It's connected because it flows from one paragraph in the ritva to the next, but we're already not in the sugya, and you have to pull back at that point. Depends how you're learning. For me, for example, my chavrusa that I have in the morning, Gemara chavrusa, we are just learning pshat. So it doesn't mean that we won't look at Tosfos if we feel that there's something that's not being resolved. You look and see if there's a pshat-oriented Tosfos. So you need pshat, you can look in Rishonim. But like just this morning, we had a Ritva, and the Ritva said something clear about learning the pshat, but all of a sudden the Ritva started going into all areas of other halach, and we said, okay, we've gotten what we needed from the Ritva, we're not doing this now. We are learning this Gemara, and we want to learn this Amud, because you can get really lost, and that wasn't the Rebbe's derech. Pshitos, but not to be, and he uses the word mivalbel, and this is a common experience. You could get confused, and you end up not having this, and you end up not having that. You end up not having the pshat in the actual Gemara, and you also don't end up remembering all the different stages and steps in all of what we were learning. See, he says not to become confused, b'shas limudei mi inyan le'inyan, to go from one area of limud to another. Ragir lahavan adavar b'pshitos b'mekaymai. Stay on the daf, learn what you're learning there locally, get pshat. This is what the text is saying. This is what the Gemara is saying, and that's good, and move on. And if you come to something that you simply can't understand, he says, okay, you work on it, but al yamad harbe sham. Don't spend so much time there. You make a mark, like Rebbe Nachman told Rebbe Nachman when he was beginning to learn Kabbalah, and he was complaining that there were some areas of the Ariya Kodesh that he couldn't understand. Says the Rebbe, it's not a problem. Make a mark and carry on. And he said, and then when you come back to the beginning, after you've learned the whole Shemona Sharim, whatever he was learning from the Arizal at that time, then you'll understand it a little bit more deeply. You'll be able to erase that mark that you made. And then you might have other marks that still remain. Okay? Go further again. That was the Rebbe's Nakuda. And I think that's really the foundation of this whole Sicha, which we'll get to, is Abyssal, like you say in Yiddish, in Breslov, Abyssal is Eichgit, which means a little bit is also good. Now, a little bit is also good could mean quantitatively or qualitatively. And over here, Rebbe Nachman is certainly not saying a little bit is also good quantitatively, because he's about to have us finish Kol HaTorah Kula every year. So that's not what he means. But qualitatively, Rebbe Nachman says, Abyssal is Eichgit. You understand it on some level? Okay, so you got it. But not to ruin your whole day, so to speak, quantitatively by just focusing in on one line and you can't understand it. This is a hard Gemara. You make a mark, you tried, and you move on, carry on. If you're not able to understand, says the Rebbe, Al Yamad Harbe Sham, don't spend so much time. Leave it, and carry on journeying. Says the Rebbe, why? Because certain parts of the Gemara are not worth working so hard on, because who cares? Chas v'shalom. That's not what the Rebbe means. The Rebbe wants that we should understand everything. The Rebbe is just giving an eitzah. He's saying that there are two ways of understanding something. On the one hand, you have a question, you can't move forward. Usually, by the way, if you have a big question on something, the Gemara is going to probably address it in 2 lines. How many times in our learning do we, that's it. It's the end of the Seder. You have to walk around and bother every, Shalom Meshav in the yeshiva. Then you come back down like an idiot and you read the next Rashi. You say, oh, so sometimes the Rebbe says it's just not a good derech. Just keep on learning, and Al Pi Roiv, he says you'll understand it. Memela, because you need context. What you couldn't understand first, you cover ground. You're able to get a much bigger perspective on it. V'amar, and he said, and this is a little bit more radical. She'ein tzrichim b'limud. You don't even need to learn. Rak ha'amira levad, just to say the words. Loimar hadvarim keseder, just to say the words like you would out of a siddur. I hope that we understand the words in a siddur, but at least that's a more basic understanding of what it means to just say words, to say the words of the Gemara. Loimar hadvarim keseder umimela yavin. And again, the focus here is not on an easy way out. The focus is on Yavin, right? Again and again, the Rebbe keeps on saying, and then you will understand. The Rebbe wants us to understand Torah. He doesn't mean to say, okay, now you can just sit and read the whole Torah. It's not gonna work, right? But the Rebbe says, we're trying to understand. We're going through it. Sometimes just you read further in the Gemara, you get to see how something works. Read the words. Umimelu Yavin. Now next week we're going to learn that there's a bit of controversy with regard to when just saying words of Torah counts as Torah study. And we're going to see that it's not so simple that this is true for Gemara. And the Rebbe doesn't make a chilik here. We're going to learn from the Shulchan Aruch Harav. The Magen Avraham says very clearly that just saying this, just using this method to just read like the Gemara is not counted. That's not what Liban Torah means. And the Shulchan Aruch Harav makes a chiluk and says that that's only about Torah Shebal Peh. Torah Shebal Peh, we need to understand it, to the best of our ability. Torah Shebiksav, however, you open up a nach, it's mamish limud Torah. Even though you don't understand it, you can just read through the Nevi'im, and you'll understand a lot more than you'd understand if you didn't read it without understanding. That's very basic math. You will have a much better chance at understanding some nach if you open it up and just read it through than if you never open it at all. That's basic, right? And that's what the Rebbe wanted from us. The Rebbe wanted to get us out of this mindset of perfectionism. Don't have to understand everything absolutely 1,000,000%. And just because there were 5 pages out of 30 that you didn't understand, it doesn't mean that the rest of the 25 pages you should be held back from engaging with. Got to give it your all but don't get caught up. And that goes back to what the Rebbe said earlier, Yishav Hadas. The main thing is, like, why? What are we doing this for, right? That's what the Rebbe always goes back to, and what Hasidus always brings us back to. If we're doing this because of some social status or pressure or needing to do this and accomplish, because our whole sense of worth relies on how much we do, and then it's going to matter. Because if you're just reading Nach, no one's going to give you a sticker. No, it's not like a davar chashuv. It's not a big deal. But if we're doing it because it's about Kvod Shamayim, and it's not pressure, it's privilege, what a chus we have to be able to learn Hashem's Torah and to be able to spend our time in a meaningful way, and there's no pressure, and we're just trying to do our best, so then everything changes. Everything changes. The whole atmosphere within which and what's inside of us, like compelling us to this limud, you do what you can with tremendous joy. And that's what Rebbe Nachman said, you'll end up accomplishing a whole lot more than having this sense of anxiety and pressure around being mamish medaktik, what you need to learn, what you need to understand, what you need to accomplish. You just move, you win some, you lose some, you just keep on going. That's what the Rebbe wanted from us, not perfectionist mindset, just to serve Hashem the best that we can. And so this is the most radical level, I'd say, of the Sicha, is just saying it alone. Parenthetically, I'll also mention that the Chidah says very clearly that when it comes to Zohar HaKadosh, which is really difficult to understand, both because of the terminology, it's in a different dialectic of Aramaic than even the Gemara, and because of the concept, the subject matter, the Chidah says you should say Zohar HaKadosh every day. Just zog in Yiddish, just say it. Get yourself a set of Zohar HaKadosh and just read it through. Chidah says it's such a tikkun for the neshama. What a tikkun, cleans you out, even though you don't understand it. I would suggest maybe that is itself the tikkun. How humbling is that? Every morning you sit down for 20 minutes and read a book you don't understand. It's unbelievable. That itself is such a tikkun. There's such humility there. You don't need to understand everything all the time. But just to do something. And to believe that it's working, to believe that the words are going in, believe that your neshama understands. Well, very, very well, your neshama understands. So that's about the Zohar HaKadosh. For sure you can do this, just to say the words. Without pressure. I'm opening it up, I got to understand everything. Just learn. Then you're going to get caught up in the beginning, because you could ask 2,000 questions on the first two words of the Mishnah, but sometimes you just have to learn a Mishnah. You could do the same thing with the Gemara. Like, let's learn the Gemara first, and then go back. That was the Rebbe's derech, and I say that for those of us that were educated in yeshivas, this is not the derech of the yeshivas. I would say that it's like somewhat of the contrast, in a certain sense, to some of the prevailing attitudes and methodology in the yeshiva. So it's just good to know there are other approaches. Doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong, but to know that there are different drachim in Yiddishkeit. Very, very important for us to know. Very important. Right? Yachnis moiche ba'alimud. Put your whole mind into it. You sit down and you want to start to learn. Focus. V'yoymar keseder bezrizos umemeli yavin. And just say, you're trying to understand it. Say, read it through. If you don't understand now, you'll understand things a little bit later when you become more familiar, more fluent with concepts and topics. And again, I just want to clarify, I don't believe the Rebbe meant that if a person doesn't know Lashon HaKodesh and you sit down and you're reading, so somehow you're going to understand. You don't know the language. If I sit down and read Mandarin Chinese, first of all, I won't even be able to read it, but we sometimes grow up in a system where we could read Hebrew, but we have no idea what Hebrew means. So that's not a very, I don't think the Rebbe meant that, right? You have to know, like, what the actual words mean. Otherwise, what value is there? And you won't come to understand it, because you're not going to learn a language by reading the language if you don't have any frame of reference for what the words mean. But Baruch Hashem, today there are so many English options for learning, for Gemara. So many online. On Sefaria, you have an option to just click English and not have the Hebrew. It could be very distracting to learn the Aramaic. Very important to invest time to learning Aramaic. You could read the Gemara in English. You can totally do that. And there are so many other Sfarim that are not Gemara, as we're going to see, that are also part of Torah, that the yeshivas may not focus on, and they're not in Aramaic, they might be in Hebrew, which some of us might have an easier time with. You can read through those. And if even those, they come with English translations, just read through them, cover ground, see a lot of Torah, pick up a lot of ideas, things will start to connect. It's a moach gadol, it's a big mind, big way of approaching Torah. Finally, says the Rebbe, and then if there are certain things that you absolutely do not understand, again, in the Seder of Bikiyas, Iyun is different, says the Rebbe, Mabekach. So what? Right? Which is like a shocking thing to hear at Tzaddik say about like not understanding something. But again, in the derech halimmud, so you don't understand. Mabekach. So you don't understand. Ki malus ribe halimmud oila lakol. We have to understand that we're talking about a trade-off. There's always going to be a trade-off. The Rebbe says what? According to him, in his derech, if we feel drawn to this, this is what we want to follow. It's not compulsory. But in this derech, says the Rebbe, we're trying to achieve ribui halimmud, a tremendous amount of Torah study, to amass knowledge, to see lots of areas of Torah, the Gemara, the Midrashim, and the Mishnayos, and Tanakh, and the Kisvei Arizal, and the Poskim, and the Chassidus Sfarim. There's so much to learn, says the Rebbe. Gotta move. Azman katzava malacha meruba, and again, not to become bewildered or discouraged. We're going to learn that at the end of the Sicha. Gotta take it easy also a little bit, right? We shouldn't be feeling bad about ourselves and beating ourselves up. We have to deal with the reality of our limitation. However, all this having been said, if we analyze our day and we start to cut out all the stupidities, it turns out we have a whole lot more time to learn, and there are in-between moments and moments to steal some time. We're going to get into that as well. So the Rebbe wants us to learn a lot, and that's what we're aiming for. That's our objective. Riboy halimmud. Says the Rebbe, there's going to be a trade-off. Just like there would be a trade-off if our whole focus was just understanding the deepest depth of every single word in the Gemara, you're going to miss out on learning other Masechtas. You're going to miss out on learning other areas of Torah. So the Rebbe says there's going to be a trade-off. And the way that the Rebbe sees the benefit of learning tons of Torah, the Rebbe can use this terminology as a trade-off to say, if you don't understand every word, that's not what we're aiming for. So mabekach, right? That's a trade-off. Mailas riboy halimmud oila halakol. That's the main thing. And now the Rebbe quotes the Gemara in Shabbos. It's a machlokes in different areas in the Gemara. What's better, Sinai, Harim, and so on. But the Gemara in Shabbos tells us this is a derech that the Gemara itself gives us for learning Gemara. Legemar v'hadar lizbar. To learn the information and then to go back and analyze. And even if a person doesn't really know and understand it, just learn through it. Shenamar, as the pasuk in Tehillim says, Garsa nafshi letava. Garsa means I just learned a copious amount of learning. Why? Because Garsa nafshi letava. Because I love Torah and I want to learn, and it's very hard for my neshama to be constrained within one particular sugya and one particular thing and to sit here for 6 months. I have to move. My Torah is chashka for bikiyas. My nefesh. It says the Rebbe, through a lot of learning, learning quickly, you're going to be able to learn a lot. Says the Rebbe, you'll end up getting both. Again, this is not an ultimate trade-off, meaning to say you'll have a lot of information, but you really won't understand it very well. Says the Rebbe, no. If you follow this derech, you'll end up with both. You'll end up with a tremendous amount of ideas, of knowledge in Torah, and you'll end up understanding it better because you'll be able to go over things again and again. You'll memela have the context. When Tosfos brings a comparison between one area of halacha and another, he knew all the Gemaras first. What we do is that, okay, we learn a Tosfos. Now Tosfos makes a reference to some Gemara in Ksubis. We never learned the Gemara in Ksubis, so what's the first thing? We got to look up the Gemara. That's a backward way. That's not how Tosfos, right? Tosfos, obviously, the question came up memela because Tosfos was dealing with a wealth of the entire Torah that he was familiar with, and then the connections started to happen on their own. Imagine that. If in the derech of the yeshivas we would teach just the Gemara and Rashi, and then after that, maybe a few times, a person would go and start to learn Tosfos. it would be unbelievable. Imagine, and all of you and myself, I assume on some level have experienced this, where you get to a Tosfos that makes reference to another Gemara that you know really well. It's a machaya. You don't have to go now and open up the Masechta to look it up and get into that sugya and then understand the depth. You know what Tosfos is asking, and you could have asked the same question yourself because you understood the source material. That's what the Maharal wanted, and that's what Rebbe Nachman is speaking about. You'll go back again and you'll understand things so much more deeply because you'll be able to learn Sfarim again and again and again. Ligamram, to finish them, v'lachsar v'lahaschal, and then to go back and start them again. V'ligamram pam achar pam. So you end up spending a lot of time on one daf, but not because you sat on it for 4 days, let's say, but because you went through the whole Masechta 4 times. So you end up spending just as much time and getting just as deep an understanding of it, but now you've also gained the fact that you can see it in context. And then you're coming to a much deeper understanding. If you did understand it the first time, you'll understand it the second time, or the third time. What you did not understand in the beginning. Whatever is possible for us, and each of us individually have our own unique levels of understanding. There's no objective, goalpost for like what learning needs to look like. Every one of us has our own capacity. And within that capacity, we can excel. We can find our chelik in Torah. V'sein chalkeinu b'seresecha, we say. Not to give me someone else's portion. Give me my portion in your Torah. V'sein chalkeinu. V'dibar har b'ma'od be'inin zeh, says Rebbe Nachman spoke about this a lot. This was his derech halimmud, which differed from some of the derech halimmud, certainly of the non-Hasidim, but even of the Hasidim. It was something different. Says Rav Nachman, as with many of these teachings that we're learning, it's very difficult to give it over in writing because it's more atmospheric, it's more contextual than content related. He's trying to give over a mindset, and a mindset it's very difficult to put down in writing. It's sort of, we're always dancing around it. And in dancing around it, so then we sort of get the picture. It's like you want to draw a circle on a paper. There are 2 ways of doing that. You can either take a pen and draw a circle, or you can fill in everything else on the page but the circle, and you have a circle. That's how Rebbe Nachman's teachings work. He's not trying to draw a circle for you. He's just sort of trying to give over an approach that's a unified approach. It's the same approach that we learned in Sichos HaRan to Tefillah, is the same thing of Torah. It's the same energy. It's an energy of compassion. It's an energy of tremendous drive, but with patience, with Yishuv Hadas. It's a Hashem-oriented approach that has very little to do with societal expectation of one kind or another. Says Rebbe Nachman, it's very hard to say this all, in actual writing. Says Rebbe Nachman, it is a very good approach to learning Torah. Because through this, we end up learning a lot. And you're going to finish lots of Masechtas and finish lots of different Sfarim. And we're going to even understand it better. More than if we would have learned b'diktuk gadol, with this incredible kind of diktuk learning, with a very strong focus on the details and the hair splitting and the comparisons and so on, because this really complicates things and there's no reason to do so. And here he says it, and this is of course true, and you and I know people like this, they just stopped learning altogether. Because they weren't feeling any sense of satisfaction. How do you feel satisfaction after a winter's man when you walk out knowing 8 blot in a second parak of a Masechta? And that you don't even remember them. You just don't remember them. Because how could you remember them? You spend so little time in the Gemara and so much time on all this other complicated stuff, which maybe at the time you wrote some notes on, but then 2 months later you look back at the notebooks, you have no idea what you yourself wrote because you're not in the sugya anymore. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort to get back in the sugya, etc. I'm not saying anything new. I think that there are many Yidden here who have gone through the yeshivas that can relate to what I'm describing here. It's something that unfortunately has caused many to stop learning altogether, even while it has produced tremendous tzaddikim and ga'onim and tamid chachamim. Because like I said before, different yidden need different drachim. And there are many, many, many Jews for whom the derech in the yeshivas today works, and it works brilliantly. And you see, they become tamid chachamim atzumim. Guess what? The derech in the yeshivas did not work for another gadol who became a Talmud Chacham Atzum, perhaps the greatest of all. And his name, of course, was Reb Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal. Reb Chaim Kanievsky's derech halimmud was the Breslover derech halimmud. Not because Rebbe Nachman wrote about it, maybe yeah, maybe no, I don't know, but it's yadua that from a very young age, Reb Chaim Kanievsky did his own thing in learning. And he was just going through Shas again and again and again and again and again. And who knows if Reb Chaim would have not had the courage to forge his own path if we would even be talking about him today. I just don't know. He became Reb Chaim because he understood what his neshama needed from learning. And it wasn't an easy way out, and it wasn't to spite anyone. It was just very humbly what he knew was right for him. And every person needs to know that there are different drachim in Yiddishkeit, and we can, we talk about kids that are off the derech, and maybe it's not like they're off the derech. It's we push them off because our derech is so incredibly narrow, and we expect they have to do this and learn like this and look like this and think like this, and it's just not them. It's just not them, and they can't. And maybe it's not their fault. And I don't know if it's a matter of fault, but I think that it gives me, at least, a lot of comfort to know that the derech, particularly the derech of learning, is a lot broader than some of us might be mistaken to believe. Uma le'nishar biyadam, says Rebbe Nachman, it turns out that in the end, even though on the one hand it looks like a far more intense kind of learning, they end up not learning at all. They just end up not learning at all. So what's better? And another point, and this is a point that I very much makar tov to Reb Shimon Meyer, who's joining us as usual for this year, because his father has written a sefer called Kach Magiyim in Lashon HaKodesh, and I don't know if is it free, Reb Shimon? Do we have a PDF that, or he still sells it, huh?
It's for sale. There's a English and Hebrew one. Some of them might be sold out, but I'll keep you posted, Yaakov, and you'll let people know in the next show.
Okay. Be'ezer Hashem. So we'll let the chaver know how they can get their hands in it. But Reb Shimon was kind enough to send me some of the sefer, and I saw another thing also that is a PDF called "What If I Can't Learn" or something like that, which I did read this morning, and in preparation for this year. And basically, the bulk of the sefer is just talking about people who really could have accomplished a lot. And because they accepted the derech halimmud in the yeshivas to the exclusion of the possibility that there's anything else to learn other than Gemara, or that there's any other way to learn than Iyun with Dikdukim and the way that it's learned in yeshivas, they missed out on so many opportunities. Because the Iyun style of learning assumes a certain set of very specific circumstances. It assumes lots of time. It assumes yishavadas. It assumes certain things that just when life unfolds for the bulk of us that aren't able to sit and learn either b'doichak or being supported, or without getting into that whole thing now, but like we have families and we have jobs and we have responsibilities and we're people and etc. So the Iyun style, it's not always possible when you have 5-10 minutes. Or if you're driving to work, you just can't sit and listen to an Iyun shir. And for many of those chevra that didn't believe that anything other than Iyun is called learning, and they just decided not to learn at all, which is so crazy. Because that's certainly not what the yeshivas mean to teach. Of course not. How could it be? So we have to understand it's important to be makabel derech in learning be'iyun. It's certainly important, as Rebbe Nachman's going to tell us himself, we need to have a seder in iyun every day. That's without a question. And to be makabel derech, and like I heard b'shem Rav Levi, it's like Bender from Rav Mata Frank Shlita, who I had a lengthy conversation with about this, and addition some other Breslover Mashpim as well, just to find out like how this is applied. And he said, Rav Levi Yitzchak said that the adults should learn derech halimmud, like Rebbe Nachman, but the children and the Bachrim in yeshiva, he wanted that they should be trained in Iyun. That was Rav Levi Yitzchak's focus, right? I don't know Bachrim. I'm not sure. I have to look back at whether he meant like cheder, like kids in. I don't know. I have to find out exactly what age, what the cutoff is. But al kapanim, there's space for that. There's room for that, but not to the exclusion of just learning anything, and however you feel comfortable learning it. We can learn so much more if we go in this derech, right? So he says, if a person goes and starts to learn quickly without too many diktukim, things will be clear. You'll learn a lot. Gemara, you're going to learn Shas, Upaiskim Kulam, and the halachic works. V'tanach, Umidrashim, V'sifrei Azar, V'kabbalah, V'shar Sfarim Kulam. It's doable. We just have to develop to understand the style of what it means to learn quickly, without getting too caught up, to learn what we can, and then go back over it again. And that, says Rebbe Nachman, is called learning. And over here, Rebbe Nachman says, and this will come to the end, as we've learned, Rebbe Nachman said that his Hasidim should be learning Kol HaTorah Kula. Before every year, he says, while a person's alive in this world, we should see every page in Shas, just to see it, even if you're learning it on a very basic level, very quickly, even just reading it. And there Rebbe Nachman, in a moment perhaps of extremity, or of yearning, more likely, Rebbe Nachman said, well, here's all the things we should be learning every day. You ready? Dainu. So much that ligmar b'chol hashana, that every year a Jew should finish Shas, im harif v'harash, with the halachic writings of the Rif and the Rash, v'arba shulchan aruch hagdolim, v'chol hamidrashim kulam, all the midrashim, chol sifrei zayar v'tikunim, v'zayar chadash, v'chol sifrei kabbalah me'arizal. That's what Rebbe Nachman wanted that a Jew should be learning each year. And also, as we said, we should learn Iyun every day. Have a shir in Iyun where you're focused on one area of learning, going slower, learning it properly, and so on. And then he said lots of other things, because we got to say lots of Tehillim, of course, and then an hour for a Spaididas. So when you put it all together, it's quite a lot. And then when he was speaking about how much we should aspire to cover, he spoke about, well, in what way? In going very quickly. Have a say to go quickly, learning quickly. Not getting bogged down. Says Reb Nassan quite strongly and quite securely, and it seems that he was talking from experience. Says Reb Nassan, we've tried this and it works. Very simple. It works. We've tried this and it works. This derech halimmud works. It's different. It requires an investment. Not for everybody, but we've tried it and it works. Then we'll just do 5, and then we'll 4, and then we'll come back next week to 5 and some of the other sources. Gam lo hayim etzavalach or take of halimudai, with regard to chazara, with regard to reviewing. The Rebbe did not want to review that a person should review something right away after he learns it. Learn the whole thing from beginning to end, and then go back to the beginning. Start again. Go back to the beginning, do it again, and then time after time after time. So this, again, like going back to the beginning with this, we'll finish. Like we said, this is different. It's different. It's a departure from the standard approach in the yeshivas, but it's good to know, because the approach in the yeshivas may not be for everyone. Just like Rebbe Nachman's derech might not be for everyone. And there are different yidden that need different things, but it's tremendous to know for ourselves and for our children that this is a thing. This is a hasaga. You can finish Kol HaTorah Kula. You can learn simply. You don't need to get caught up in every tiny detail. And if you don't understand, you make a marking. You keep on going. And there's an Indian to finish something that you start at the beginning and finish at the end, and then go back to the beginning and go it again. There's a tremendous amount of to learn. We can take time and mamish learn however much we can, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and so on. And I really can't finish this Sicha without just doing one line from number 5. And with this, we'll mamish finish. Gam amar leval yeh nivel mise. This is perhaps the main thing. This is not meant to make us discouraged. That's not what the Sicha is here for. It's meant to be the most encouraging thing you've ever heard on Limud Torah. That's what it's supposed to be. How encouraging it is that everyone has a chelek and everyone has a way of learning that's matim for them and just reading the words, etc. Not meant to make you bewildered. But the Rebbe says it's a lot. That he wants you to learn mamash the whole entire day. Whoa, it's a lot. It's good to aspire to that, but it could be very discouraging. Says the Rebbe, no, that's not the intention. Many, many ways and pathways to Hashem. That's what this whole Sicha is about, within Limud Torah. But what if a person is not cut out for learning at all, of any kind, etc., even within this system, which accommodates everyone, but a person might have a different nekuda. Says the Rebbe, you can be an ish kasher be'emes, nothing to do with learning how much you know, how much you don't know, how much you can, how much you can't, what your circumstances are. No discouragement, no pressure, privilege. Step after step with Yishav Hadas. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot that we can chaparein, especially with this derech, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. You walk around with a pocket sefer, you cover 1 page, 2 pages, not super orderly. You have to do this amount to that amount. You pick up where you left off and you carry on, and before you know it, you finish things, and then you go back to the beginning and you get a deeper Havana in it. And this is the derech halimmud of Rebbe Nachman. Sichos HaRan aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Amen. Very important, very, very important and encouraging for people to know. And Be'ezus Hashem will spend another probably shir or two on this Sicha, going into some of the other sources you see. It's not some radical Breslov thing, like none of Rebbe Nachman's stuff are. It's just people just don't know. But there are many, many, many tzaddikim that spoke about this, that bemoans the way that the learning is being done. And it's very encouraging to know that we can cover this amount calmly, with joy, and with gratitude. We have this privilege of being among those that are connected to Limud Torah, yearning to learn, and are able to learn, each of us at our own level, quickly, simply, and we should be zeicha, kach magiyim, we should be zeicha to it. Be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach. Okay, so thank you for joining me. It's a bit chaval that we couldn't get the last 3 lines in, but that's also okay. See, don't have to finish everything. Just do what you can. Okay, Yasher Koach, thank you so much for joining. Wishing everybody the most wonderful rest of the week. It's a very special Sicha. Keep it in mind, Sicha Ayin Vav, very famous Sicha, and so clearly presented. It's a whole derech. It's a different derech. It's a whole new approach to learning. And Be'ezus Hashem, we should fill our time with good things. Be'ezus Hashem. Okay, wishing everybody an amazing rest of your day and week. Kol Tov. Thanks for joining.